Hey guys, I'm assuming I might be live this time. We've been trying, and if you've been trying to log in, sorry about that. We did practice this and it did work earlier, but you know, that's why we're here. That's actually why we're having this session. So my name is Sharon Bertsch. I'm the Managing Director of the Jazz Education Network. The other person that you see with the headset that's dealing with the tech stuff is Jesse Nolan, our membership manager. We'll hear from him a little bit later. I don't want to get in the way of why you're here. But I did want to say that this happened because, of course, we're all scrambling to figure out how in the world do you teach online when you're self-quarantined and trying to do this. And when we saw a post that Justin had posted last week, we tapped him on the shoulder. He's one of our Gen members, very valued member. And we said, hey, would you mind sharing that with everyone? I think a lot of people would love to hear and learn from whatever you've picked up and learned. And so that's why we're here. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin, turn off my video. I just wanted to welcome you. And Jesse and I are going to be working in the background. If you have questions or you have a comment on what Justin is talking about, put that in the Facebook comments below, and the Gen staff will be reading those. And if we see something that we want to throw over to Justin that feels like it needs to be, you know, right then, we will alert him and get it in the feed. And if it's something that could possibly wait until the end, we will certainly have a Q&A time at the end where you can ask your questions, as well as an opportunity to a follow-up survey with any additional questions, because we don't want it to go too long. But at this time, we'll just let Justin take it away, let him keep his stream of thought. And so welcome, Justin. Thank you again for volunteering your time and all the prep work it took to get to this point.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sharon. So for those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Justin Binek. I'm a professor of music theory and jazz improvisation at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. And some of you may be wondering, okay, cool, great. Who are you and why are you qualified to do this? Honestly, I am not a tech expert in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. But the reason why I posted in the first place, and the reason why Sharon and Jesse reached out and asked me to do this, is because of experience that I did have in doing this. My daughter, who is adorably cute and wonderful, any of you who I'm Facebook friends with know that I litter your news feeds with pictures of her, was born early in the spring 2018 semester. And at that time, rather than actually have to hire a substitute or to figure out what other solutions in that regard, for reasons that I can get into later, my dean and I made the decision that I would teach online during those couple of weeks. And there are a lot of things that I learned at the time, and I've continued to do some online workshops and to give lessons online since then. So what I'm hoping to do again is to give you some tips and tricks that I've learned, some things that I've found that have helped out, and hopefully help all of us make a little bit of sense of this. I'm actually kind of grateful that we had some technical issues occur at the beginning of this workshop, because that's important. It's important to know that stuff will not work. Stuff will not work perfectly. Stuff will manage to collapse. Stuff will, you will test everything and make everything run perfectly smoothly. And then when you go to actually start doing an online class, something will go wrong. It's important to know that, and it's okay to know that that is in fact the case. It's just, you know, don't panic, keep your head above water. So it's, the handout that I've got is that I sent to Jen to be included as a part of this webinar is actually going to form the basis of a lot of what I talk about. So I want to just talk about the kind of the first 8 important things as far as if you are dealing with being online for the first time and have no idea what you're doing in this environment. So I'm a Douglas Adams fan. I have been since I was in junior high school. And so it's, as the cover to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says in big bold letters, don't panic. And that's easier said than done, especially as we're all preparing to remove the bulk of our instruction online. But don't panic. So point number 2 is don't try to do everything at once. It's basically keep a level head about what you're doing. And my recommendation would be is for the classes that you're preparing to move online, make a list of tasks and put them in order of importance in terms of what are the most important things to do. First of all, in terms of just getting all of your students together with you in any sort of online format, and then start figuring out, okay, what are the big bullet points that I want to try and get accomplished in this mode? Then start checking things off that list. But don't try, I cannot stress this enough. You cannot teach online the same way that you would teach in a classroom situation. It won't work. It can't work. It's not set up to work that way. So the big thing is to identify in order of importance the things that need to be accomplished and then set about accomplishing those tasks. Again, relating to the fact that we had some technical failures at the beginning of this webinar, you will do things that won't work, and that's okay. There will be things that you try with the best of intentions, or there will be lessons that you set up for your students with the best of intentions, and something will go wrong, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. That doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. What it means is that things happen, and especially in an interface that is relying on online technology and online content delivery, things are definitely going to happen. So learn from those things and then move on from those. I referred to this earlier, but again, it's important to bring this up. You will not accomplish everything online that you would be able to do in the classroom setting. And it's important that you be okay with that. And your students will understand this. This is an unprecedented time for all of us. And having to move everything that you teach online means that you are going to be grappling with new modes of delivery, new language, new everything. You will not be able to accomplish in an online session what you can accomplish in the classroom in the applied lesson. I feel like when I was out on my paternity leave, I got into a groove after a bit. And even at that, I would describe generously my teaching effectiveness as about 70%. It's not possible to be as effective as a teacher online as you are in a classroom, particularly if you have never taught online before. And that's okay. Again, we're not talking about designing online classes. We're talking about triage. We're talking about the need to move all of our classes to an online delivery format. Okay, getting back to the connection issues. I mean, the connection issues that we had at the beginning of this webinar were actually pretty minor, all things considered. At minimum, the first time that you teach online, lecture or lesson, and most likely the first 2 or 3 times, the bulk of your time is going to be spent dealing with logistics and connection issues, both on your end and on the student's end. And so this is where patience is key. It's important to ask the students to be patient with you as you're trying to figure this out. And it's also really important that you be patient with your students, because the odds are that, and we'll get to this later, but many of your students are going to be accessing this through their phones, not necessarily through their laptops, through their phones. Their connection may be spotty at best, and there may be lots of distractions taking place in their home environments. For that matter, there may be plenty of distractions taking place in your home environment. As I mentioned before, I have a delightful 2-year-old, but she is, let's just say she's vociferous. So just know that you're going to have to take some time to figure out the logistics of the connections and putting everything together. And you might think that your students are super tech savvy. They're less tech savvy than you think they are. And there are going to be a lot of times where you're going to have to send out an email to your students explaining exactly how to go through the login process. And that's perfectly okay. And remember that we're all in this together and we're all trying to make this work. Another thing about teaching online, I'm an extemporaneous person. I have general outlines for the way that I approach classes, but I like my classes to be more free form. I like to be able to respond to student questions in a thoughtful, improvised way, and be able to go in, different, sometimes goofy directions with the class. I can't really do that in an online format, at least not the way that I would in a typical classroom format. The A big key to making your online course sessions work is preparation. It's having a plan of attack. It's really, it's being, having a structure in place in terms of knowing exactly this is what we want to talk about today. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we want to do. This is how I'm going to deliver some assignments related to this, all of these things. There's some of the extemporaneous teaching that I like to do, some of the improvisation as a teacher that I like to do. I can't really do online because of the nature of the interface. And so if you're a teacher like me, who likes to be a little bit extemporaneous in the classroom, you should know that you need to be less extemporaneous in your approach. But at the same time, be creative with how you're going about your planning. I said before that you can't accomplish in an online session what you can accomplish in the classroom when you apply the lesson, but if you can be more creative with how you go about it, you're going to be able to do more in terms of assisting your students and giving them the best and the fairest teaching experience possible. This refers to both the way that you go about delivering the content of your courses and also the way that you go about grading students or giving assignments or providing feedback or things along these lines. So it's be creative and especially be creative in terms of working within the parameters that your students are dealing with, because I guarantee you that right now they are just as freaked out about all of this as you are. They may not show it, but they are just as freaked out about all of this as you are. And finally, your students will be patient with you. Like I said, they'll be patient with you, especially if you ask them to be patient with you. And in addition to that, you need to be patient with your students and help them navigate through these kind of uncharted waters. All right, let's talk about some of the practical sides of these things in terms of the way that we're dealing with teaching online. The setup that I have right now is probably similar to the setup that a lot of you are going to be dealing with in terms of your online content delivery, in that I'm sitting in my living room at my piano, and I don't have a pair of fancy headphones in. I have a pair of earbuds. Now, for purposes of clearer, cleaner audio quality, I am using a blue Yeti USB microphone. I would recommend ordering something like this or something similar from Amazon. Currently has them for $120. It's a very worthwhile investment. And basically just the clearer that you can make your audio quality, the better. The cleaner the audio signal that you can provide to your students, the better that it's going to be in that case. In addition to that, but like I said, in terms of headphones, I'm not using fancy headphones. I'm using earbuds. And actually, if I wanted to, I could, in fact, unplug this microphone and strictly use the microphone that's connected to the earbuds. And the audio would not be terrible. It would not be great, but it would not be terrible. But in terms of my setup, right now, everything I'm doing right now is utilizing my laptop, and I'm sitting at my piano in my living room in full view of the IKEA circus tent over in the corner, and with all sorts of toys and things in the background hanging out in here. Again, I want to, basically right now, I'm trying to keep it as real as I possibly can. And so the reality of it is that you're going to be teaching in whatever situation you're going to be teaching. Now, if you have a home studio space in your house, that's amazing. But it's likely that many of you will be jury rigging together a system like this. And it's okay. You can actually do a lot with a system like this. Now, it would be great if you and your students all had wired Ethernet connections and microphones with audio interfaces and could communicate with each other with minimal lag, but that's not reality, and that's not what most of us are going to be dealing with. like I said, on a basic level, simply using the microphone input on your laptop or desktop computer will be serviceable. Again, I would recommend a USB interface like this one, because you can get them for a relatively reasonable price tag. But at the very minimum, make sure that you are using earbuds with a microphone, because you can hear students more clearly that way. And even if you're just using the microphone that's connected to the earbuds, your students will hear less extraneous noise on your end, such as 2-year-olds or pets or dishwashers or things along those lines. Now, in terms of internet audio, it's, again, this workshop is geared towards the beginning educator. And so if you're unfamiliar with the concept of compression, you need to know that all sound on the internet is compressed. Within the bandwidth constraints of most people's uploads, as far as what their internet service providers allow them to do, it is not possible to transmit uncompressed audio. And basically, a simple definition of compression is that basically the sound is shrunk, and that especially the high end and the low end are taken away, so that the audio that you hear online is a very mid-range heavy sound. And then also most apps and also computers, tablets, phones have noise reduction features that also compress the sound further and change the quality of the audio. So the bottom line is that when you're teaching, and especially if you're teaching private lessons, there are going to be things that occur in the audio that are just simply a result of audio being transmitted over the internet. And the reality of it is that the audio quality will not be the same as if you were hearing the student live. Take that into account. And as a result, when you're teaching private lessons, know that the bulk of what you're going to be doing is dealing with stylistic issues, not so much issues of tone, because the tone is being manipulated in such a way as to be nearly unrecognizable. Another issue that we're going to talk about is that there is always latency, or in layman's terms, lag, when you're teaching online. When you're teaching online and when you're talking online with a single student or a group of students, there is always a delay in terms of the sound arrival. We'll talk about this later, but this is why, even though I've been seeing lots and lots of posts related to this, this is why it is virtually impossible to rehearse an ensemble online at the same time. Please don't try it. You're going to get frustrated and it's going to be a bad experience for everybody. We'll talk about ways to deal with ensembles later, but just know that lag is an issue that you do have to account for, whether it's a classroom situation or an online situation or a one-on-one lesson situation. As you're teaching, try to be in a situation in your house where you do have minimal distractions at work. My house isn't particularly great for that, to be perfectly honest. We have a pretty open floor plan as far as the way that our house is designed. And as mentioned before, I have a lovely daughter, and I'm not going to constantly please be possibly going to be like, okay, shh, daddy's online. Stop bothering daddy. She's 2. You make do with what you got. But please be where you, as minimal of an interference-based situation as you can, but we all make do with what we can in whatever ways we can. I've told my classes to anticipate Quora making regular appearances. So this was a request that just came in online, which was to ask about using computer speakers instead of headphones or earbud speakers, the pros and cons of doing so. For me, the biggest thing about teaching online is that when I'm working with students, particularly if I'm working with private students, if I'm trying to teach a lesson online, if I'm just using the speakers from my computer rather than using headphones, the problem at that point is that it increases the likelihood of audio interference for starters, because the thing about it is, whatever audio I'm hearing from the students by way of headphones is just going directly into my ears this way, as opposed to being put forth from my computer speakers and then also going into my computer microphone as well. That also, depending on how high I have the gain on my microphone, it could also increase the chance, like I said, not just interference, but potential feedback in terms of just noise cancellation across the spectrum. So whenever you're working with students, whether it's a classroom situation or whether it's or whether you're dealing with a one-on-one teaching situation, please use headphones, in part because you're going to deal with less issues of noise interference. And then also, the other thing is you're going to be able to hear the students much more cleanly, much more clearly, much more solidly at that point. It's the issue of noise compression is bad enough to deal with when you're on headphones. If you're dealing with compressed sound then being sent out of computer speakers, especially if you do not have your laptop hooked up to good speakers and you're just using the speakers on your laptop itself, the likelihood of, extreme distortion is likely, and also just not really being able to get any sort of a clear signal from your students at all. So any sort of online teaching that you're doing, please use headphones. All right, now, one other thing that I would recommend to you is record every session on your computer as far as you're teaching, whether it's a private lesson, whether it's a class, whether it's any of these things. Record every session. I put in the handout, things happen. Wi-Fi flakes out. Students forget to charge their computers. And so it's every computer does have a native video recording software of some sort in terms of how they set up. So for me, actually, like one thing that I do in terms of just something that's quick and easy and nicely navigable is that before I start a session, and at this point, I'm going to go to a screen share in Zoom. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit later, but I want to go to a screen share just to kind of demonstrate this. So now what I can do is, as I'm recording sessions, were I to want to record all of this, in this case, I'm not actually recording this session because Jen is doing so. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jesse. But for all of my online teaching, whether it's the lecture classes or the applied lessons, I'm going to, since I have a MacBook, I'm going to use the native photo book software, and which has a fairly decent movie function. And at that point, basically what I would do is record my entire session as we're teaching it. So from this point onward, everything that I'm teaching to the classes will also be recorded in terms of video format. Now, this isn't perfect. It doesn't actually record the entire interaction with the students who are in the class, but it does provide an audio and video record of everything that I'm talking about, particularly if, for instance, for my theory classes, I'm actually going to have a whiteboard in my living room. So things that I write on the whiteboard to share with them will be captured on this video. Then later on, I can upload this to something like Google Drive or Dropbox or something along those lines, just so that it is another resource for my students to have in case there's something strange that occurs with their particular video connection. Returning back to the full window. All right, I will talk about screen share in a little bit when we talk about Zoom platforming. But as I put here, the big thing is, in one way, shape, or form, please do what you can to record everything that you teach. And like I said, I would upload it to some sort of a cloud sharing service, whether it's Dropbox, whether it's Google Drive, or whether there's a native platform that you happen to use in terms of your school's course management software. But then just so that can also be accessed by the students. The biggest thing is you need to strive to create as many ways for your students to access the content as possible. without driving yourself completely and totally insane, which is probably easier said than done. But anyway, moving on, let's talk about different online platforms and kind of some of the pitfalls and pratfalls of them. So for my theory classes, and actually for all of my lecture classes, at the school that I teach at, Kansas City, Kansas Community College, the Zoom meeting platform is built into Blackboard. And these sorts of large style platforms, whether you're talking about Zoom or GoToMeeting or Google Hangouts or other things along these lines, Google Hangouts, these are the types of platforms that I would recommend in terms of delivering large scale course content. Like I said, Blackboard has Zoom embedded in as a function. And this is what I used primarily when I taught when I was out on paternity leave. One thing that I like about Zoom is, in fact, the idea of the share screen function. And I mentioned this before, but within the Zoom interface, if you're using Zoom as a video chat, there is a button at the bottom of the screen that is called Share Screen, which if you tap on that, it gives you options to, for instance, access the desktop, a whiteboard, your iPhone, or from an advanced perspective, you can go to Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Drive or things along those lines. But for instance, if I go into Whiteboard, that then allows me to potentially actually be able to write, draw, create certain things in terms of that kind of an interface. The whiteboard function works better on an iPad than it does on a laptop, not going to lie. But in particular, if I use the Zoom function to access my desktop at this point, then let's say that I've got a jazz improvisation class where for a portion of this, I'm delivering an online lecture. At that point, then if I wish, I can access a couple of different concepts in terms of being able to bring up, for instance, an Ella Fitzgerald solo transcription and be able to access specific targeted sections of it, bring up the PDF, show it to them. I'll also email this to them. I would actually have emailed this to the class in advance, but this then also allows me to do an immediate sharing of information to show them exactly where and how these kinds of things can work. Again, I really like Zoom in large part because of the screen share function. Returning back to the regular screen. Now, the question came in as far as, asking what camera setup do I have? I'm using the camera that's built into the laptop at this point. I do not have an external camera at place right now. You can use an external camera, but again, for a lot of us, we're going to be dealing with a fairly minimal setup. And so, like I said, the setup that I'm using right now is literally just laptop, headphones, and for clearer audio, I am using an external microphone. But for the camera, I'm just using the camera that's built into the laptop itself. In terms of viewing music in the computer, yeah, if you're sharing things with the students, screen share, or again, emailing musical examples to your students, sharing them in your course management software, that sort of thing, is the kind of idea that works really well in this regard. All right, now, let's talk about the practical aspects of dealing with large-scale course content delivery. The first thing is that in a lecture class setting, no matter what platform you're using, whether you're dealing with Zoom, GoToMeeting, which, by the way, shout out to GoToMeeting. They just announced that all of their software, all of their online meeting software is free to use for educators for the next several months, K through 12 and higher ed as well. So that's another great resource. I've used their software before for meetings, and it's good, it's clean, it's decent. Whatever video concert, so in a lecture class setting, make sure that your students mute their microphones as soon as they log on. For instance, in Zoom, there is a little mute button down in the left-hand corner of the screen when the students log on. It's the format that I used for my students in these theory classes was that, in terms of delivering content, I would sign on, get everything set up, send students the link to the meeting link for the class that day. And then as the students would log on, they would immediately mute themselves. The reason why I had the students mute themselves is not because I didn't want to hear from them. It's because once multiple people start talking over a connection, the amount of garbled interference becomes completely untenable, and it just flat out doesn't work. Zoom does have a chat function that allows students to ask questions, and so because I wanted to keep a sense of interactivity still built into the class, I love the give and take of the classroom. For me, it's the hardest part about the idea of not being in the classroom with my students. I love the give and take of the classroom. So if a student had a question or a comment, what I would ask them to do is to simply type the word question or the word comment into the chat function, at which point then I would ask them to unmute themselves so that they could ask it for the rest of the class. Now, I could just have them simply type the question in, but like I said, for me, I wanted to keep that bit of interactivity still going in terms of the way that I was organizing the class. Now, we need to take a second and talk about the idea of synchronous teaching versus asynchronous teaching. Synchronous teaching is just simply the fancy buzzword for teaching simultaneously. Everyone in a class, or both people in an applied lesson, online at the same time doing the same thing. Asynchronous teaching refers to the idea of, for instance, the teacher uploads an assignment and some demonstration videos and some examples, sends it out to the students. Students complete those, record videos, send them back to the instructor. There are teachers who swear by asynchronous teaching when it comes to online delivery and state that, for them, the synchronous teaching is too difficult to work their way around. That's totally okay. And there are pros and cons to both synchronous and asynchronous teaching. For me, I personally prefer to strive to do as much synchronous teaching as I can, just because I feel like it keeps the students engaged in the class. Rather than just simply sending out, well, here's your assignment, complete it and send it back to me. For me, this provides an opportunity to actually maintain a connection, to see my students on a regular basis, to be able to chat with them for a bit, just to maintain that connection, because, well, that's really important. I'm a people person. So now, whatever video conferencing you're using, I mentioned this before, but email your students explicit instructions on how to log on and what your expectations are for the course sessions. My student, back when I taught my theory classes online while I was on paternity leave, my students actually lovingly referred to it as pajama theory. I actually had to enforce a minimal dress code because some students were taking that a little bit too literally. But again, set up your expectations for the students in advance. Let them know how the course is going to work. Let them know what they should do upon logging on, taking care of, several things in those regards. Like I said, I prefer to do things as synchronously as possible. And so again, the question issue, I didn't want my lectures to simply be just, I talk at the students and then they do things. So again, giving the students, guidelines in terms of asking a question or tossing out a comment or putting the things in those ways, it prevents lectures from being nothing more than an hour of the instructor talking. I say this looking at the time and realizing that now we've been on essentially 34 straight minutes of me talking, but shh. Now, different platforms have different capabilities when it comes to the mobile interface. again, a thing that I like about Zoom is the fact that uh, it does have a decent mobile interface. Google Hangouts has a great mobile interface. And again, some of your students might only be accessing this class by way of their phones because they don't have a decent computer at home, or their laptop died, or any number of different things. So, be sympathetic to these situations. Now, for those of you who are completely new to this, it's do this only one way, but it's one thing that I actually plan to do is to actually stream the class on multiple platforms to give my students multiple options, depending on what interface works best for their phone and or frankly, what interface they can make the most sense of. Google Hangouts is pretty intuitive in terms of its interface. And so even though Zoom is the native conferencing software that's built into Blackboard at my school, I also plan to stream my classes through Google Hangouts as well, just so that it is another option for my students to access in. And like I said, I also will be recording all of my classes in photo booth on my laptop, just so that it's there as another resource for my students. Now, so that's the large group scale meeting options. For one-on-one meeting options, Skype, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Google Duo, things along these lines. Okay, and understand, I am not the expert on online lesson delivery, but in my experience, Facetime, the native app for the native content app for iOS, is to me the best audio quality and reasonably consistent video as far as delivering one-on-one lessons. Now, the only problem with Facetime is that it does require both parties to be using iPhones or iPads or MacBooks. So if one of you is not operating on an Apple platform, FaceTime doesn't work. Beyond that, Google Duo is good in terms of its interface. Skype is the most well-known and the most popular one-to-one interface, but in my experience, honestly, the audio quality is really spotty. Of the various platforms for making video calls, Skype has probably been the one that I've had the least success with, to be perfectly honest. And then Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp are okay in terms of their audio and video quality. Facebook, in my experience doing lessons with Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, Messenger will freeze from time to time, and WhatsApp's sound quality is either really good or not that great, but they can work in a pinch. A question just came in where I was asked to address the idea of streaming or making them available on multiple platforms at the same time. Sure. So just to give an example of how I would go about this concept. So let's say that I'm teaching a music theory course and setting things up first thing in the morning. I am once again going to go into screen share momentarily, possibly. Hold on. Okay. So once again, I'm going to go to screen share and I'm going to go into my desktop. So at this point, let's say that my goal is to, stream the class on both Google Hangouts and Zoom, and to actually go in and record it and to do a video recording of the class. So what I would do in that regard is, wrong window, apologies. First thing that I would do is go into Blackboard and let's say Music Theory 2. So within the Blackboard course shell, I go to Course Tools, except not that one. I go to Course Tools, I go to Zoom Classroom. And from here, what I do, I don't have any meetings set up right now, but what I would do at this point is, if I had scheduled a new meeting in the first place, from here, then, I have my Zoom interface ready to go. Blackboard would have actually already sent an email to my students as far as a reminder about logging onto the class for that period. So my Blackboard is good to go. In addition to Blackboard, then I would also go into Google Hangouts, which, if you've never accessed Google Hangouts before, if you have a Google account like Gmail, Google Hangouts can be accessed by way of the sidebar menu up in the upper right-hand corner. To tap in, you go into Hangouts, take it from there. And again, in this case, what I would do is I would go to like music. In this case, I actually still have my old Music Theory 2, Spring 2018, up and ready to go. And at that point, I would go over to the video call up in that portion, and I would start the video call in Google Hangouts as well. So basically what I'm doing right now is I am running a video call both through Zoom and Blackboard, and I'm also running another video hangout by way of, I'm running another video call by way of Google Hangouts. Then, in addition, just to make sure that I am, providing whatever I can for the students, I hop into Photo Booth. And as the class is getting ready to start, I pop over to video and I record it for myself at that point, so that even though there won't be necessarily the interactivity that there would have been with either Zoom or Google Hangout, I'm still making a recording of the session that I will then upload into, actually I'll probably share it to Blackboard later so that it's archived and set and ready to go. But all of this, again, is just, trying to find as many ways to reach my students as I possibly can. Now, do I necessarily need to do this? No. But since I can, I figure I may as well, because it only takes me a couple of extra minutes to set up, and it allows me to provide yet another way to reach my students. All right, working back into the idea of kind of thinking about specific courses that you might be teaching. So it's, I mentioned this in the recording, but actually I had never thought I mentioned this in the handout that I put forth, but this is actually something that I would recommend as far as kind of a totally new way to go about it that I had never thought about. But Jeremy Siskind, who's a wonderful pianist and teacher out in Los Angeles, came up with this idea where he actually figured out that you could set up a multiple camera setup in particular in his case, for teaching piano, by basically having his laptop in one spot, having his phone mounted on a tripod in another spot, and having his iPad mounted in another spot, and then using all three of them to log on to the same Zoom meeting session for purposes of delivering piano instruction. I think that's kind of brilliant. Now, if you don't have those resources, don't worry about it. But that was what I thought was a particularly brilliant hack on Jeremy Siskind's part, and so I just wanted to give him a shout out for that, because, well, I plan to use it when it comes to teaching piano. All right. Now, for lectures courses, like in my case, for delivering things in music theory and oral skills, if you're teaching music theory or oral skills, your course should your textbook should have some pretty decent online resources included as part of it, because most textbooks do at this point. I use Kevin Holm Hudson's Music Theory Remixed, which has some pretty fabulous online music resources. But again, if you're using any of the big music theory texts, there are pretty much always good online resources that you can access in those regards that can help you out at this point. I also, in terms of creating drills for students, I use musictheory.net. They have they allow you to customize exercises for identification, construction, ear training. Sight Reading Factory is what my wife, who's a middle school choir teacher, actually does with her choirs. And they actually have video interfaces that allow students to record themselves into their phones, onto the interface that the teacher sets up for ease of grading. And so, yeah, so Sight Reading Factory is cool. Theoria is great. 8notes.com is a great resource for reviewing the basics. And then Smart Music is offering free use of their software through June 30th. And they've got some really good oral skills tutorials hanging out there as well. I talked about the idea of the lecture instruction. Again, for a course like theory, basically what I would do is teach sort of the way that I would normally teach. Like I said, I'll actually have a whiteboard in my living room that I can write examples on. I'll be emailing examples to the students. I'll be playing examples on my piano, and we'll have our system set up where if they have a question or they have a comment, they can pop in and unmute. Now, for things like oral skills and musicianship, this can get a little bit trickier, especially if you're trying to do graded tests, because unless you're setting up one-on-one meetings with every single student, which can be a little bit time intensive, well, actually, no, it's not a little time intensive, it's a lot time intensive. What I ended up doing and what I would recommend doing when it comes to oral skills tests is actually going more towards an asynchronous approach in terms of the way that you go about the quizzes, but taking advantage of technology in terms of giving students time parameters to do that. I wrote this in the handout that I provided, but for oral skills quizzes, like for sight reading, here's the formula that I would use. First, upload exercises or email exercises, because as soon as you do that, there's a timestamp as far as exactly when it was sent. And then give these students a defined window in which they need to, and for me, I just use email. Email a video of them performing said exercises, which in that case they can do using their phones. So it's not a perfect solution, but it absolutely works. So like I said, that's one of those where it's like, send it out so that you've got the timestamp as far as exactly when it was done. Give the students a defined period of time in which to sing through the exercise, record themselves doing so, send it back to you. And then for dictation, again, this is where like using classroom video interface, something like Zoom or Google Hangouts. At that point, I would play the harmonic or the melodic or rhythmic dictation exercise, and then have the students basically write down at that point. I'll give them the parameters, the starting pitch, the whatever. Have the students write it down, and then take a quick snapshot of their work and using their phone and email it to me. Again, quick, easy, done. Probably the simplest way to go about that kind of an exercise. One thing about doing those sorts of quizzes online, whether you're talking melodic dictation, rhythmic dictation, those kinds of ideas, play it more times than you normally would. Give students more time to get it right. Again, online interfaces aren't perfect. Depending on what's going on with the student's internet connection, they may have, things may cut out in the middle of it all. So play it multiple times, and if a student asks to hear it again, let them hear it again. It's everything about our approach needs to be kind of shifted at this point. Taking a moment to just kind of talk about the idea of more one-on-one courses like jazz improvisation or applied lessons. If it's possible, I would recommend that a student use one device for communication and another for playback of examples. if they're using a laptop, they can do both of those at the same time, but otherwise you have to make modifications to your teaching. That's just the way that it goes. Again, some people prefer to do private lessons in a totally asynchronous method. I like to do a little bit of synchronous teaching as far as courses like jazz improv and like applied lessons are done, but we can kind of make things work as best we can. For jazz improvisation, again, if everyone had their computers wired up via dedicated Ethernet and everyone using mics connected to an external interface, we could all play together. Actually, no, even then we couldn't. But it's theoretically we could all play together. But lag is going to make it impossible to have everyone play simultaneously. So what I would do for a course like Jazz Improv is set up a group chat using something like Zoom or using something like Google Hangout, demonstrate those larger points that you want to get into, and then actually set up separate one-on-one conversations, whether it's using Zoom or whether it's using something like FaceTime or Google Duo or Facebook Messenger or whatever. And then set up those to listen to students performing with play-alongs, whether those are tracks that you generate yourself, whether it's things that you use from Jamie Aebersold or playjazznow.com or iReal Pro. By the way, I know that it's common for cool jazz people to say, oh, iReal Pro, the drum sounds suck and the piano accompaniment is whatever. Hey, I love iReal Pro, and I love iReal Pro for being able to do things like, oh, here are 6 courses on another U in C, go for it. So that's a way that I love to do this. Be creative, be flexible. And, for applied lessons, if you've never taught them online before, it's kind of jarring. I'm moving through a couple things pretty quickly at this point because I do want to leave some time to answer some questions that have been coming in. But if you've never taught applied lessons online, first of all, know that you cannot, I'm a teacher of singers. And my instinct is to correct an error in pitch by playing along with the singer. And because of internet lag, that doesn't work. And it's also impossible to lead students through real-time warm-ups. So in terms of your online teaching for applied lessons, think about things like, okay, number one, your students need to warm themselves up beforehand. If warm-ups are a part of your lesson time, I'm sorry, but they need to not be, because you're going to lose effectiveness and you're going to not be able to get to everything that you would normally. So this is a good time to really instill good warm-up students in your habits in your students if they're not there already. Second thing, provide accompaniment tracks for your students so that they have something to practice with. Whether it's play-along options, whatever it happens to be. Generally speaking, when I'm teaching an online lesson, I usually try to approach it as more of a stop-start. You do a thing, I do a thing, you do a thing, I do a thing, you do a thing, I comment, and have it be more that way rather than the give and take that I would normally do in a lesson setting, primarily because of the logistics of teaching on the internet. And it also allows you to offer targeted feedback more quickly for doing so. Make sure that however the student has their phone or their computer set up, that you can observe their posture and their technique. That's a biggie. And then I mentioned this before, but because of the limitations of sound and online formats, focus on things other than tone. It's, the microphones that most of our students are doing are going to negatively affect their tone. So focus on style, focus on notes, focus on all sorts of things, but know that you're really not going to be able to address tone in this passion. And again, be patient. Everything will take longer online than it would in the studio.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to jump in here.
Cool.
Thank you very much. We're going to, I think, move on to some Q&A, be conscious of everybody's time.
Of course.
But we got some really great questions. First, I want to thank everyone for joining. We really appreciate everyone checking out this workshop. We are going to make this workshop available after this stream is concluded, we will send you an email so that you can access that video. And we're also going to include a link to another survey in case you have some questions that you would like to ask Justin that we don't get to today. Please follow us on Facebook.
Questions that I may or may not have the answers to.
Please follow us on Facebook. We're planning on doing some more of these workshops over the coming weeks. We have another one today at 2 p.m. Central with Dr. Matt Letter called How to Teach Instrumental Lessons Online, which I think will be a nice complement to this today. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the Jazz Education Network, you can go to jazzednet.org. But let's take some questions now to Justin. Here was the first one. Rich DeRosa asked, Justin, could you please discuss the video aspect? What camera setup are you using? Inside your computer, separate camera. What about viewing music on the computer? Is screen sharing the best?
First off, hey, Rich, good to hear from you. So in terms of the video aspect, I mentioned this before, but I mean, for purposes of this conversation, and in part because this is what a lot of us are going to be doing, I'm strictly using the laptop camera. That's just built into, I have a MacBook Pro, and so I'm just using my laptop camera. And then, you know, in terms of viewing music in the computer, assuming that you're referring to the idea of dealing with sharing music with students, or going back and forth, like, well, since it's Rich DeRosa, I assume this is probably referring to composition. Yeah, I think if you're teaching composition lessons, it's probably best for both the student and the teacher to be to utilize Zoom and to be able to do a screen share back and forth. So that, for instance, if I wanted to, and this is slightly terrifying, the idea of putting a chart in front of Rich DeRosa, but let's say that I wanted to share a chart with Rich DeRosa, then at that point, I would probably hop on into something like this and pop this up so that if I were taking a composition lesson with a Rich DeRosa, then he could then, you know, have by way of screen share, be able to look at everything that's going on from what I've got at play here, or the other way that I might do this is just simply do a quick back and forth email exchange. But in terms of immediacy, screen share is probably the quickest way to deal with getting music immediately back and forth between teacher and student.
All right, thanks, Justin. Another one, let's see here. We've got one from Kara Greenup Post. She asked, just for you to clarify, which streaming application did you say was best for audio?
If we're talking private lessons, the best luck that I've ever had in terms of doing online private lessons is actually with Facetime, which is the native Apple video chat function. Like I said, the only problem with Facetime is that it requires both people to be on Apple products. In other words, iPads, iPhones, or MacBooks. If that's not available, a one-to-one Zoom connection can be good. And actually, I've only done it once or twice, but Google Duo, which is one of the Google app suite that you can access from the menu in Gmail, I've found to be quite useful and pretty decent in terms of quality, both for audio and video, in terms of doing applied lessons. But yeah, if you and your student both have iPhones, use FaceTime.
Excellent. Here's another one, and this goes to the teaching coursework online aspect of what we're talking about. This is from Cedric Dent, and Cedric asks, what about the written exams for music theory? Are those timed too, and how do you minimize cheating?
Cedric, how you doing, man? the I might at this point I'm actually going to take a bit of a pragmatic view towards all of this. You could do a timed exam. It's I mean like there and in fact that would actually be fairly easy to do in terms of just whether it's sending out an exam by way of email or Blackboard or Canvas, whatever in interface you have, send out the exam, and you have 2 hours to complete this. Um, and print out and complete it. Honestly, I'm probably going to be doing very, very little in terms of timed exams in this regard, in part because students are dealing with enough weirdness as it is. The other thing is, like, if it's the sort of thing where you're wanting a student to print out an exam, that also requires them to have printer access or things along those lines. Now, if it's something where you send it out as a PDF that they can use an iPad to write on, that's a different issue. But all of your students may have different issues in terms of their connectivity and their capabilities as far as what they can do. So at this point, I would actually probably take a pretty pragmatic approach to all of this and just simply ask the students not to cheat. And you're not going to be able to stop the people who want to cheat from doing so, but it's generally speaking, I find that like when I've asked students to like be on their honor, most of the time they're actually going to respond to it. The other thing is you can actually check in with your students as far as who has what in terms of their tech capabilities at the moment, or who has printers or whatever. And at that point, you make different allowances for different students. There is no exact science to all of this. If every student has an iPad and every student can, edit PDFs and lock it in, cool, great, you have 2 hours to complete it. But otherwise, I would say it's a matter of just being flexible and working with the students. And yeah, asking them to be honest.
Thank you, Justin. I know that's a concern of a lot of educators, is the aspect of academic dishonesty during this time. A couple questions that are similar, I'm going to combine two here. We have people asking about Zoom being the best platform for sharing other web content. So for example, you want to play a YouTube video through your Zoom chat and have students be able to hear what you're hearing, or be able to pull up a theory website like Theoria or another tool that you want students to be able to both see and hear. The question is Zoom the best application for that?
I don't know the answer to that question. Generally speaking, if there is an exercise, if there is something that I want students to listen to, whether it's a YouTube thing or whether there is a Theoria exercise that I want them to do, at that point, usually I do go to a bit of an asynchronous approach. I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert in any of this by any means. And so for me, I think the idea of, it's a question that I legitimately don't know the answer to. So what I have done and what I did do in this case was, if there were exercises I wanted students to do, or YouTubes that I wanted them to watch, or recordings that I wanted them to listen to, or whatever, those I would send out in a separate email. And that would be an assignment that they would have to take care of in that way.
Excellent. Here's a question from Paul B. McKinney. He asked you what earphone, and a couple other people asked the same thing. What earphones and video setup are you using right now?
Okay, in terms of earphones, literally, for the earphones I've got your standard Apple earbuds. Just these guys. Now I actually do have nicer headphones that do have cleaner audio quality, but I actually wanted to use these today as an example of the fact that you don't have to, like, manically start ordering things on Amazon in order to make a perfect audio setup in your house. Like, the audio quality on earbuds, it's not perfect, but it's quite good, to be honest. And then, like I said, in terms of video, I'm just using the native video camera that's built into my MacBook. I'm not using any sort of external camera at all. I have one, but again, for purposes of this particular workshop, I wanted to do it by kind of like the least amount of extraneous gear necessary, because that's honestly what a lot of us are facing right now. As I said before, I am using a blue Yeti USB microphone, which I mentioned before. It is $120. I would recommend getting one of these or something similar, just because it does provide it does provide cleaner audio quality. And for you as the teacher, I think that's important for you to be able to provide for your students. But that's really the only modification that I've made to my audio and video setup for this particular workshop.
Thank you. Jeremy Sutton asked, Justin, could you please say something about using the computer speakers instead of your headphones or earbud speakers? Pros and cons.
My recommendation would be don't. And the reason for this is because it's for me, the reason why I want to have the audio going in by way of headphones is because once you're using external speakers from the computer, if you've got an external microphone as well, or even if you're just using the microphone input on your computer, or the microphone input on a pair of earbuds, the likelihood of audio interference starts rising rapidly. So my first and biggest piece of advice is, rather than using external speakers, use headphones, because it's going to make your job a whole lot easier.
All right, a couple follow-up questions about microphones and the earbuds. So we had Michael Jeffrey Stevens ask, can we hear the piano played through this mic?
Yes. Now, at this point, I'm probably going to shift the mic, because right now I have the microphone sitting on the piano. So I'm going to move this over here. And now the other thing about it is, this could be work well, or this could be completely terrible, because we didn't test the gain out using a live acoustic piano. This is something that I would do otherwise. But for instance, right now using this mic, I'm just going to play. I've got the una corda pedal on the piano, but
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
I think you might be transmitting through your earbuds microphone.
Oh, that should not be happening.
Give that a check real quick. I heard the compression kick in like it would on a phone call.
Okay. Input, Yeti stereo microphone. That should be where the input is coming in.
Okay.
So let me adjust the gain downward slightly.
Give one more check for me. Did you check in Zoom?
Let me do that.
Check in your Zoom preferences, because when you touch the your lapel mic, I hear the scratching of your finger on it.
There we go. Check, 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 check.
Hey,
check.
now I hear a Yep. Now I hear a condenser mic.
Beautiful. Okay.
Cool.
So yeah.
Yeah, that was a much better sound, much fuller, and also the we didn't have the same compression issues. So there's a good example of the difference between you know, what a reasonably priced USB condenser mic can give you, and you know, holding your earbud mic to the piano.
Correct.
Cool. And there was another question that was kind of similar, and we actually got to it just now. So the question was asking to hear the difference between a headphone mic, the mic you have, and perhaps the mic inside the computer. What's your take on the mic in the computer, just the default internal microphone?
It's okay. It's, if you wanted, I could actually redo, if you want, I could redo the settings, but it's, I mean, what I would say is that in terms of overall quality, I would say that external USB would be the best quality, followed by, for instance, using something like the mic associated with the headphones, followed by the mic that's actually built into your computer. But any one of them can work.
Yeah, we have a bunch of individuals now commenting too, and I think this might be a good moment to address it. There are sometimes duplicate and dueling settings on your computer when it comes to connecting a microphone. So while the settings window on your computer might say that you have the blue Yeti microphone active, you also need to check that that is how you're set up in your Zoom application. Do you want to screen share and just show the difference between those two real quick so we can, quickly wrap up this, the demo? Because I think that's an important thing that I think will make a big difference for people when they're trying to use a mic.
Yeah, what I'll do here is switch over to my desktop screen view at the moment to demonstrate this. And yeah, so for instance, let me actually close a couple of windows and then I'll reopen a couple of windows. So for instance, if you go into your system preferences or your settings and go into sound, like for instance, right now I have, in terms of my sound output, I've got my headphones going into my headphone port. And for my sound input, I have the option between an external microphone plugged into the microphone port, that being this guy, or the Yeti stereo microphone, which is what I'm using right now in terms of, which is what it's set for. But within the actual Zoom interface itself, and let me get back to that. Okay, come on. Come on, Zoom. You can do it. So now if I go into the Zoom settings, the thing about Zoom is now if I go into the preferences window in Zoom, then this actually, it says speaker, test speaker, built-in output, headphones. But now in terms of the microphone, within the Zoom system itself, I actually have to select the Yeti stereo as far as my option there, because otherwise it listed as same as system or built-in microphone, external microphone. So in this case, with that interface, you do need to make sure that you actually do select if you're using an external microphone, make sure that it is selected on both devices.
All right. Thank you, Justin. I think that's going to about wrap us up here. I'm going to send a link out to everyone who joined us here, and I'm going to post the link in the comments right now. If you would like to download the handout that Justin has been talking about, many of you who registered already should have received a link to download that. But if you're joining us here on Facebook Live and you didn't register, I'm going to post the link here in the comments so that you will be able to download the handout that he is talking about. And in a few hours, I will also send out a follow-up email that gives people access to the same resources, including this video session again, but also gives you an opportunity to ask any follow-up questions that you may have as a result of Justin's session. Justin, thank you again so much. We really appreciate you doing this on behalf of the community, everybody who's scrambling and struggling right now. We thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. And
Jesse, thanks Thanks for asking me. I'm happy to do whatever I can to help.
Thank you. And thank also to the Jazz Education Network for putting this on, and Sharon Bertsch, our managing director, for facilitating, and to Kelly Carson in the background, who's been helping us so much with all the calls and communications we've been getting. So please look for those communications. Don't forget, we have another one of these coming up today, 2 o'clock Central, right here on our Facebook page, How to Teach Instrumental Lessons Online. Look for that email, and please follow us on social media and check us out on the web. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.